Hey everyone, we're back again. Episode number 3 of the podcast Beyond the Dirt. Today we're going to get into the EQIP process and talk about a certain practice that we're starting to see a little bit more out there. But I'd be remiss to say if you see our background, if you're watching through video of our watershed posters. We just came back from the Iowa Water Conference down in Dubuque for 3 days. And it's tradition to have your watershed poster down there. And so Neil and we got our posters printed off at Signs and Designs here in town. Was able to showcase our projects down there. So if you can kind of see them, obviously they're backwards with the screen recording, but definitely some awesome information in an episode. Probably a couple episodes to come. I think it'd take a whole episode just to get through each project themselves. So we're just going to touch on real quick. I had to point those out as we'll be talking about them sometime soon, but today we're going to jump right into the EQIP process. We have a batching date or a deadline date coming up here this Friday, Neil, about getting EQIP applications signed and delivered into the system.
So I know the last couple programs we talked about cover crops and stream bank as being a really good EQIP program, the environmental quality incentive program.
We're gonna get this down by the end of the podcast in like 5 years. We're gonna have every single acronym
5 years. I've been at this for 21 years and I still can't remember them all.
Well, maybe it's something else. You never know.
So anyway, another one of our really great practices that the EQIP program has some good money for our clients is the EQIP program for ag waste. We always call it ag waste, which I'm not a real big fan of calling it ag waste. It's manure handling, and it's the nutrients that the livestock
I got to interrupt though.
operations.
I think if somehow we need to put a poll out there, is it manure or is it manure?
Manure.
I'm saying manure.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I got a little French in my ancestry.
I don't know.
That's
Or we can just get right down and dirty with it and give it the 4-letter word that everyone knows.
I'm trying to make it a little fancy here. Anyway, we digress. So anyway, now you've totally thrown me off my concentration. No. So the EQIP program is another great program to use for our resource concern of the nutrients on the farm. So let's say we got someone that comes in, they've got livestock and they've got manure on their operation, and they don't have a lot of storage. They might have some runoff going to a nearby creek and stuff like that. So it's actually a two-step process.
Maybe got a neighbor complaining.
Oh, could have a neighbor complaining. That happens too. We all can't get along. But we have to have what we call a certified nutrient management plan. So if we build this structure, we have to know where are we going to put these nutrients. Do we have enough land to spread it on? Do you have, we don't want to put it on sensitive ground that's like next to streams and things. So this two-step process, first we do a certified nutrient management plan, which you can have the EQIP program pay for it. One step back here about this deadline. It's usually once a year. We have to have our EQIP application signed by. It's usually that first week of October. I know it's a busy time of year, so Hunter and I are usually running all over the countryside with a stack of applications, chasing farmers down in their combines and balers and choppers and whatnot. But this two-step process is to have that nutrient management plan in place before we do the structure. Now, to have this nutrient management plan done, we don't do that in-house. We used to do it back years ago. It just got to be, workload got too much. So what they started doing is having these individuals be trained in it, and they're called TSPs, Technical Service Providers. See, I got some of those acronyms figured out.
The coffee's kicking in.
That one's only 3 words though. That one I can handle. When it gets up to 4 or 5 or 6, then I'm a bit lost. But anyway, we have these individuals. They have they've been trained in what the nutrient standard. I think it's called the 590 standard with NRCS. So these individuals, we put them in contact with the farmer. So there's 2 ways you can do this. It's kind of the fast track or the longer process. The longer process is you can have a CNMP funded through the EQIP program. And they're kind of pricey. It's kind of based on the number of cattle you would have. Most of them, I think, are in that $2,500 to $5,000 range to have these nutrient management plans written. It's a document. It's actually a lot of great information. So this TSP,
I was just gonna say, even if you're not maybe planning on moving forward with the EQIP as far as the structure and stuff, and you just want to do something on your own, it's gonna give you a heck of a leg up just
oh,
knowing what you
absolutely.
got out there, how much manure your cattle are producing, how many cattle you got out there. Maybe you plan to jump from 250 to 500 cattle in the next 5 years or something like that. That plan's really gonna give you a good stepping stone to move forward, even if you're not trying to find a program through EQIP as far as structure.
Oh, absolutely. So, like this fast track, the fast track would be you just hire this TSP. They come out and take inventory of the number of cattle you have, how much manure you're producing, all your land. They get updated fertilizer or nutrient soil testing done. So you have all that data because we're only wanting to apply as much manure and nutrient to the land as Iowa State recommendations are for the use of that next year's crop. So that would be the fast track. Slower track would be we could fund that CNMP with the EQIP program also. But what happens is that takes a year to get the nutrient management funded. Then you do it. Then you wait till the next year to sign up for that. Because we have to have that nutrient management plan in hand, we send it down to Des Moines, and we have some NRCS specialists that look it over to make sure everything adds up. So that's the whole CNMP thing. So I've always said it's like the golden ticket. Once you've got that in play and it's approved, then we can go on to the next stage.
Yeah, so I mean, once you get that CNMP, then we can really start to move forward and get that structure planning beginning. I mean, we're still going to be looking for the applications like we talked about. And we've done it both ways. I mean, Neil talked about the fast track, he talked about the golden ticket and whatnot. We've done it both ways where people have gotten funded with the EQIP funds for the CNMP and then applied for the structure. They've also done their CNMP on their own and then got EQIP funds for the structure. And they've even had guys that get their own CNMP and done their own structure too. So we've seen all ends of it.
We've also had where, I mean, it's a competitive, the EQIP program, it all depends on how much money is in the pot, how many applications are there. I mean, there's only so much money each year it's going to be funded. So when we get through, let's say we've got the process for the CNMP to begin with. It doesn't guarantee you're going to get funded this year, and that's why we kind of been on this fast track deal, is like having this done, because that just adds another year to the process, and we haven't solved the resource concern. But then also with this I&E that we do, we'll set up an appointment. We request the assistance from our area office. So our area office engineer, who will do most of the designing on this, we'll talk about a little bit about size and things and what we can do and we can't do, or have to hire that out too. But anyway, we do this I&E, and mostly what we're doing is we're getting the number of cattle that they have on their farmstead, how many acres they have, what their goal is. Do they want to have, is their goal is they have runoff off their feedlot or their cattle lots? Are they short of storage? Because our goal is always to have 6 months of storage of manure. That way you can always apply manure either in the spring or in the fall, prior to planting your crop or after the crop has been harvested, because we definitely don't want to be applying manure to the frozen ground, because you know what happens when you do that. It gets these early spring rains and whoosh, it goes right down the stream. So we're trying to get that 6 months storage. So with this I&E, we go through all that. We talk about size. We talk about we get right down to where, okay, how many bales of corn stalks you use. I mean, who would think that? But the more bedding that you use, that adds to the amount of storage area, because that will all be pushed into a structure.
I am amazed though, every time we go out and we're having these questions and talking with the farmer and the landowner out there as far as what they're doing, they ask the question, well, how many bales do you use? And I would say 75% of them may not have the exact right on the pin number, but they're pretty dang close, and they got a pretty good idea of how many bales they've made, how many bales they've used. Even if they're using, like we were talking about Bill Maher the one day, he's got two operations within a couple miles of each other, and he said, let's just, for example, I made 1,000 bales, and I used 650 up there, and I used 350 down there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good for those guys that have all that stuff going on and still know exactly what they're using. I mean, that just goes to show that they know what they need to produce every year.
Well, honestly, a farm is just like a factory. The farmer's the plant manager, and they're going to know exactly how many, right down to the number of ballpoint pens they have in their storage closet. So that's a valuable asset, and that's a valuable meeting that we have. And then we can also discuss, some of these different structures. So we want to get right into the structures now, or do you want to talk?
We probably should back up. I mean, we talked about what they have for animals out there and stuff, but really, when we get down to the nuts and bolts, we got to know what we're trying to solve.
Oh, sure.
And so, what we call is the resource concern. So, a lot of times we're dealing with manure, which then contains bacteria, mainly E. coli, is the number two things that we're really trying to solve here. And so, trying to have that sort of containment. And then the next thing is sediment. We never like to see a lot of runoff, and some of these large structures take on some heavy rainfalls, which creates a lot of water that comes really fast. I mean, if you guys live in a city, I guess we were just down in Dubuque, and they were talking about their problem down there. Obviously, they have a lot of relief or a lot of topography down in the city of Dubuque and a lot of cement, which creates a lot of fast water. And so you get, say, an inch or two rainfall event in a couple hour time frame. That's a lot of water coming all at once. And so it's kind of the same deal with these buildings is we have a lot of water that we got to deal with, and we always want to keep the clean water clean. And so knowing what our resource concerns is, or what our nutrients are that we're trying to either hold or use at specific times becomes really important too. And then we talk about what kind of animals are we going to deal with. I mean, a lot of people think up in Howard County and think about pigs. Okay, a lot of times these structures aren't used for hogs or swine. They can be, but the majority of the time we're using them for cows, dairy and beef cows for the most part, feeders, and different things like that. And so that's where we usually deal with is the cow spectrum, and go from there on as far as what kind of structures we could use. Depends on what kind of cow or what type of cow we're using out there.
Well, I'm going to back up a minute and talk a little bit more about the bacteria, because that's one of our, so for like our watershed projects, Hunter's project is primarily based on nutrient reduction. Sediment's always like a secondary type thing, but nutrient reduction strategy, that's the catchphrase in Iowa. So his water quality initiative project, that's his main thing. So with my project, it goes back to what is the impairment of the water body that is in my watershed. So in my Silver Creek watershed project, we have an impairment for bacteria. So there's this list that the IODNR keeps track of. It's called the 303D list, and it has a list of water bodies and their impairments. So back at one point in history, during water monitoring many years ago, there was a high, they've been tracking high levels of bacteria in Silver Creek. So our goal for the project is to get it reduced. So with the funding for my project being the EPA, that's what our main goal for this watershed project. So when I wrote my watershed management plan, pretty much everything was built around that reducing bacteria, because we talked about the total maximum daily load, TMDLs. It's also for bacteria. So every stream and river in Iowa has different class rankings dependent upon how much interaction human beings have with the water. So if it's just a stream you're just driving by and looking at and there's no interaction, it has a certain class rating. It's like 1 through 3. And the more interaction, so if you're like canoeing down it, like we do on the Upper Iowa, it gets another class rating. Well, then people are tubing and wading and all that. So you really got some pretty intense contact with the stream. So that's why Silver Creek bacteria is its main thing. So just a little, to let you know, we are reducing those bacteria levels. We've been sampling on these streams for Silver Creek for about 12 years now, and we are seeing improvements. But that was just to kind of get back to where we do it. And actually on Silver Creek, and you do bacteria testing on yours too, don't you? Or no?
E. coli.
Yeah, E. coli. Okay, so on both of our watershed projects, we've talked about water monitoring, where actually that could be a podcast just about all our water monitoring stuff that we do. But anyway, we pull water samples and send them to a lab, and we get readings back on those E. coli levels. So, but yeah, continuing on, talking about those animals. In my watershed, I actually think there's only one hog barn in my entire watershed.
I
usually,
can't say the same.
Yeah, you've got quite a few in your watershed. A little bit different landform. But The one thing with the hog barns, those are new structures usually, and they come built in with their own manure handling system already in place. So I've in my 21 years, we've really never done anything with hogs. Now, if we had like an open lot type pig situation or something like that, but the resource concern on these hog barns has already been taken care of as far as manure storage. They've got the pits underneath, and they've got their nutrient management plan already with the Iowa DNR and stuff. So that's usually not where we're working. As far as dairy, man, years ago there were so many dairies in Howard County. I wish I could take Hunter back in time just to see what Howard County looked like back in the
we're
70s
not all
and 80s.
75 years
Oh,
old.
we're not 75. Don't listen to him. We're not talking about ages anyway. So, and I'm not 75. So anyway, so now, livestock production in Iowa has changed dramatically in the last few years. So either we're going to be upset about it and not be able to deal with it and stress out over it, or we're going to make the best of it and make sure that everyone's farming environmentally in harmony and using those nutrients. And we'll talk about that a little bit, how valuable these nutrients are. That's why I hate calling it ag waste. Ag waste reminds me of nuclear waste or something. This is a valuable commodity as far as renewable nutrients. But
Egg nutrient storage.
yeah, I've played with all different types of phrases when I describe these things, but it usually just goes back to ag waste. But okay, let's see where we're at. Okay, so the dairy. So a lot of these dairies, they've gone from pastures to now they've had lots, and now we're trying to put these animals in these new freestyle buildings. They're on sand bedding and things like that. Or we've got beef cattle. We've got the cow calf situation, which most of those are still on pasture, or in parts of the year they're in a lot. But mainly with the beef, we're talking about feedlots where we've got eaves. We don't have eaves on the building, so the water's running into the lots. Water's running through the farm lot, farmyard, and into the lot, and things like that. So it's primarily what Hunter and I are working with are the dairy farmers and the beef producers.
Yeah, and I would say in your watershed you have kind of two main dairies. In my watershed I have one really big dairy and a couple smaller ones here and there. But we try to work with all of them the best we can because they all really need a little bit of a help in some sort of form. And I guess real quick, I mean, it doesn't always have to be just EQIP funds. We talked about yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Our SRF loans, a guaranteed 3% interest. A producer can get up to $500,000 for a loan, and it can help with a lot of different projects that maybe don't fall under an EQIP scenario. And so it gives those guys an opportunity, if they're ready to build something, whatever it may be. They either don't have the time frame to wait, or it doesn't fall under an EQIP scenario. So it gives them that option where they're able to go and do that, and it's a really great funding source. Yeah, it's not technically cost share, but it kind of is. I mean, the 3% guaranteed loan is a lot better than a lot of banks can do.
Yeah, I mean that is huge. I mean, when we work with these landowners and cattle operations, it's usually 1, 2, or 3, up to 3 generations of family on these farms. And there's absolutely, with the way farming has been and how up and down commodity prices are, if it wouldn't be for some of the assistance we give them to farm in a more environmental way, first off, they wouldn't be able to put these pits and stuff and handle their manure and keep the water clean. And secondly, financially, it would be a huge burden on them. So not only do we use EQIP, in my watershed, like I said, because there's bacteria impairment, and I get money from the EPA, so I can use some of my 319 funds, my Silver Creek project funds, to help fill this void. So on EQIP, with most of these manure pits and things, we're talking 40 to 50% of the costs we secure this money for. So I can, with my money, fill in that void up to a 75%. And then, like Hunter said, this SRF loan, these low interest loans that are guaranteed by the state through your own banker. We work with the landowner and their bank, and then it's kind of like an interest buy down program. So, that's huge too. I mean, just having a low interest loan can make or break some of these projects. So that's a pretty good deal too.
Yeah, so I guess enough about the money, enough about the nutrients. Let's hear about what we can actually build. I mean,
Okay.
we've talked about cover crops, we've talked about stream bank stabilization, and so we kind of went from cover crops, which is more of a management practice. It's there, it's gone 1 year. Your stream bank is stuff that we put there. Probably not going to move, but it's possible. These egg waste structures are not moving. These are
Yeah.
solid cement,
This
lots of rebar, and are not moving. Even in a big windstorm, they ain't
they're
moving.
not going anywhere, and they're going to be here for 50 plus years.
Yes.
You know, this is the brick and mortar. You know, I'm all for these watershed projects, but you know, we're beyond demonstration. We're implementation. We want some of the money we're spending. We want it to last for a long time. And the cement projects they do. If anybody's seen one of these buildings go up or one of these manure pits, the NRCS standards. So they're all supervised as we're building stuff. I mean, there's a lot of rebar and all that kind of stuff. So we're definitely building these things to last. So, but yeah. So as far as the structures, so this goes back to that whole I&E where we're visiting with the farmer and see what kind of cattle they have, how their operation is. I mean, sometimes we're building stuff off to the side on one direction out of the farmstead or not. Sometimes we're right in the middle of the farmstead and trying to work in around buildings and stuff and things like that. But one of the things that we do is these roofed buildings. And this is a newer project. I would say probably maybe 15 years ago, we started doing these, they call them roofed structures. So they can either be what we call a monoslope building, where we've got the roof, it all slopes to the back so that we don't have any of that runoff getting. But the main thing is we have a roof covering the entire area where the cattle are hanging out. And so within those buildings, there's different ways we can fund things. Let's say a dairy farm. Let's say they've got a freestall barn with sand bedding. So obviously they're not containing the manure within the building. What they're doing is they're scraping that walkway where the cows walk and where they feed. So we have to have a structure for that. And usually what we're doing is putting a pit in the ground where they're pushing that manure, several times a day into. The other one is, which these are kind of cool too, is they call them a deep bed pack. So these structures, we can pay on the roof because the manure is being contained inside the building. And they're either bedding with straw or corn stalks. They have this, what we call a heavy use area where the cattle are standing and eating. So they're feeding them in an inline bunk. We've done a couple different styles. With the dairy cows, it's kind of nice to have like a bigger traditional looking barn. I would call it a barn. It's not so much a monoslope. Monoslopes are more for like feeder cattle and things like that. Whereas the barns are kind of cool. So we got these alleyways that go down through the center and in the barn, and the cattle are being fed there. Well, they've got these areas that are really deep bed packed with this corn and stalks. So it's kind of fun to see them in there. They're just hanging out, sitting on their piles of straw and corn stalks. Then we've got the monoslope building. So the monoslope, like I said, all the water goes to the back. So what we usually do is we're digging in a trench behind the building to put let that water go into it, filtrates in. We have a underground outlet of tile, and we take that to a safe distance from the farmstead and release the water where it stays clean.
Yeah, and you could even do those with the normal barns too. I mean, it doesn't have to be just the monoslope. And maybe some of you that maybe don't live on farms or on where cattle live and whatnot, maybe you've heard of a beaver system around your house. Honestly, it's the exact same thing. Basically, just digging that trench around the outside of the building, putting that wash rock in there, putting your tile in there so that the water's able to infiltrate fairly quickly, getting the tile, and then head out to a safe outlet or a healthy outlet rather than outletting right next to your house or next to your structure, whatever it may be.
A lot of times we've got these older farmyards, and then we look around and there's all these older barns and sheds, and we've got all this water runoff. So, it's nice to put an eave on them too. I mean, what we do is we calculate the roof size and how much size of a eave we would need. Put all that water, and then we'll put all this underground piping in before we pour the concrete too. So we're collecting all this. You would not believe how much less bedding you have to use when you keep all that rainwater off. I mean, it's crazy. It's fast water and it's a lot of water. So I've talked to a lot of people before and after we've put these eaves in, and they're maybe using half the amount of bedding. Corn stalks can sop up all that extra water. So what's the use? Why treat clean water. We want to get that clean water off of there and just deal with the water that's on the lot.
Yeah, and I mean, keeping your stocks clean or your bedding clean, whatever it is, but you're also keeping your animals clean. I know, like Mark and Charlie up in your watershed there, um, they are just ecstatic with their projects they've done up there, and they've talked about the increase in milk production, just keeping those cows in under roof. They're not out in the elements, whether it's the cold, the extreme heat, the wetness. They're not the owners aren't having to go out there and corral the cattle in the waist deep mud and stuff like that. And so just increased milk production. Yeah, you had some costs up front putting these buildings up, but the dividends that it's going to pay off down the road is much higher.
Cow comfort is huge in production, whether it's rate of gain or production of milk. The California had that ad campaign, Happy Cows. These are pretty happy cows. Every time we walk through them, even in the summer, we've gone on taking people on tours through these barns, and it might be 95, 100 degrees out, and it's usually 15 to 20 degrees cooler. There's fans blowing and things like that. So that's a big part of it. But like you said, the production increases are huge. So yeah, keeping that clean water clean. The other thing with the monoslope building, and when I've always liked to go along on these I&Es. I kind of set up the arrangement with the farmers, so our area engineer comes along, and I always learn something too. And one of the things is where we, like on these monoslopes for beef cattle, we're paying for that concrete where the cattle stand, where we're scraping from, and we're pushing that manure. Usually in these monoslope buildings also, like the beef ones, we've got a designated area, maybe 25% of the area. It's kind of like we sink it down a little bit where you can kind of push some of that manure in. That too, being under roof, is going to keep any runoff from happening. But we found out that even in the front where you drive with your TMR mixer to feed the cattle, we can concrete that and call that a heavy use area, because we just put a fence around it and gates and things like that, so it can be temporary storage. The cows can't be out there all the time, but let's say you're sorting or you're cleaning out some of the bays, you can temporarily keep them out. So I always learn something new. One of the other things I learned about was having a cow-calf operation. I was always a little perplexed because we really didn't have a program where we could get some of these cattle. We live in northern Iowa. People calve all different times of the year, and sometimes that time of calving is cold, wet, nasty, and the cattle are out in the lots. But prior, we had to keep those. Let's say a monoslope building beef production, we had to keep those cattle in there the whole time as far as feeding them out. And once they went in there, they stayed there. Well, the new thing now with these cow-calf operations, we can bring those cattle in off a pasture. Let's say November, they can be in the barn, deep bed pack, and feed them there, stay inside, and then as they calve in the spring and the pastures are greening up, as soon as they calve, we can have a birthing bay for them. We can kick them back out so they can go back outside. So we've got the best of both worlds. We've got the cow and calf being inside where it's nice and dry to have their calves, and they're not out in the mud and the elements. And so I don't know. So that was a new thing. So we've got 2 or 3 individuals that are interested in that.
I don't know about you, but getting to go back inside in the cold and the wind and the snow sure sounds pretty good to me. And then once you can smell that green grass out there, open the door and let me run.
Yeah,
that sounds like a blast to me.
Yeah. So like I said, we're learning new things. They've adapted. They've kind of got to the point where we've got such a diverse. The other fun thing is just going to these farming operations. Everybody's got a pretty unique operation, and for us to be able to take our cookie cutter programs and try to make that work with them. It's amazing. We get a lot of really nice stuff done by doing that. So now we'll get into like the manure pits, the more cement concrete type things. And I know a few years ago, some of our dairy guys, they were using that deep bed packing for their milk cows also. It just got to be a lot of work, a lot of hassle trying to get enough bedding in there to keep the cows clean and all that kind of stuff. And the cows are kind of all over the place. So a lot of our producers went from a deep bed pack for their dairy cows to a free stall with sand bedding. Life is a beach. These cows, you go in there and they're laying on this, couple feet of this really nice soft white sand.
This isn't the coarse sand that you kind of see on a beach. I mean, this is some nice, very fine granular stuff.
It's
I
soft.
would love to jump in there.
We were out, they had delivered some the other day, and I just wanted to like lay down and take a nap. But anyway, so with that sand in these round manure pits that we had been putting out for primary liquid, you push that manure, well, you're bound to have some sand come with it. So what was happening is we were getting a lot of sand in our round pits. Round pits, we'll talk about application, but you got to pump that out. Well, you can't pump sand, and if you try to, it's going to be so hard on the equipment. So we went to putting in more of a rectangular square pit with a ramp in it, in a two-stage system where you're pushing that manure that has sand in it, goes into the first stage, the sand settles out, the solids settle out, the liquids move to the other side, they take and pump that into a round pit. So we've kind of evolved on how we do some of these setups on these farm sets. And so that way they got the best of both worlds. They can drive down inside there with this ramp, take out the solids that are left behind after pumping, and then from those round pits, they can, usually what they're doing nowadays is to keep some of these big manure wagons off the roads, is they call them umbilical cords, and they're pumping, and they got these big long hoses. You may have seen them out in the field. There's like an injector pulled behind a tractor with this long hose, and that's what they're doing, is they're injecting that manure.
Yeah,
So
and what's really cool is those round pits that you kind of talked about first. A lot of times is what they initially use. Say, for instance, let's just say 20 years ago, this is what they normally used, and now we're able to implement a brand new rectangle or square pit, still utilizing that round pit, usually farther away or whatever it may be, to then let those liquids drain into, pump into, whatever you use for gravity. But they're still able to use a pit that they installed maybe 20 or 30 or how many years ago, not decommission it, still be able to use it in some shape or form, and then just keep building off of that, which is really cool, I think.
yeah, because like we said, these manure pits, hopefully they're going to have at least a 50-year lifespan, if not more. So we want to, farming practices change, just like we've talked about, going from a lot of tillage to no-till and cover crops. I mean, we've had a huge transformation in our livestock industry here in Iowa, and we're trying to keep up with it. And like we said, it's usually more numbers, more concentrated numbers. We're trying to handle that manure in the best way that we can to use that valuable commodity.
Yeah, and when we're planning for these pits, I think rule number one is never skimp on the size. I've never heard of one person say, "Oh, this is way too big. This isn't going to work." It's always the opposite. "Oh, I wish I would have gone bigger. I wish I would have done this 5 years ago." Because it gives them that at least 6 month storage, sometimes a little bit longer, which then they're able to apply at right times. They're not hauling every single day and whatnot. And B, it just makes their operation so much cleaner. I mean, to have one specified area where they can push is so nice for them. And then, I mean, if you're trying to picture what these things look like, these round pits are maybe, I don't know, anywhere from 100 feet wide to 500 feet wide, some of the larger ones.
They're big.
They're pretty big.
Yeah, 300 feet I think is probably one of the bigger ones, but yeah, they're huge.
Yeah, and then these square rectangle pits, now those are even larger. I mean, that one out at Tim Huey's, I'm trying to think what the dimensions off the top of my head.
Yeah, I should have looked at those, but
if I had
it's
to guess,
big.
maybe like 80 by 250 or 350.
Yep, I would say that's
And
probably
then he
what it
built
is.
a brand new one. Well, that's probably what, 10, 12 foot tall.
Mm-hmm.
The new one's probably what, 150 wide by maybe 400 long and 12, 14 foot high.
It's big.
I mean,
It's big. It's going to hold a lot. It's going to hold a
they're
lot of
not quite
nutrients.
the size of a football field, but they're
Yeah.
pretty damn close,
Yeah.
and they can hold a lot of you know what.
Yeah. Well, in years, well, this kind of dates me a little bit, but 20 years ago, we were still doing what they call earthen lagoons, where we would just shape it out of soil, and then that was kind of sketchy. So we don't do that anymore. I mean, you can, but we don't fund them with our. So that's the other thing is, not only is there the financial incentives that we offer, but just peace of mind. I mean, I wouldn't want to have an earthen lagoon in the karst area and have a sinkhole open up underneath. Man, can you imagine the headlines on that? That'd be scary. I mean, it's bad enough some of the manure spills and things that we have that we're trying to eliminate. So that's definitely a big plus on those manure pits. And yeah, the size. I haven't met anyone that wishes they had built a smaller one. It's usually we got to come back a few years later. They may be pumping more water. Well, the other thing too is we design these manure pits to make sure that they have. We never want them to be more than 18 inches from the top of the thing. Because guess what? Remember that rainy September we had probably 2-3 years ago? We had almost 30 inches of rain. I mean, we had a year's worth of rain in 1 month. 30 inches of rain. You know what that does to a manure pit that's almost full and you're waiting for the crops to come off?
Starts bubbling up
Yeah.
as far as
So-
the farmer's stomach starts
Yeah.
to bubble.
So you definitely don't want to have these manure pits overly full. So yeah, we want that 6 month plus storage area. So we got the well then, talking about eaves and stuff on buildings. I mean, I've been to farmsteads where just the farmstead itself. Usually the farmstead is built on the higher part of the land that you own. Back in the day, they were pretty smart about most. Well, yeah, most. Sometimes they're right at the bottom next to the creek. Those are a little bit more challenging. But the idea is to keep that water, even the yard water, and runoff in the vicinity from running into a cow lot too, because we can do some different things. Even one of our farmers actually has almost like a storm sewer system built up because he's got so many areas on the farm where this water is coming from. But just by grading the lots and regrading stuff to keep that clean water clean, so that's always a plus too. So then, like these eaves. So like I said, first thing we come in the yard and we're kind of looking around and it's like, oh, we got all these eaves and stuff. So we talked about how we plumb those in. But these French drains, that's kind of cool. So some of these buildings, I mean, they've got a lot of size on them. By the time you put a huge eave on them, even if we're draining it to each end of the building, it's still tremendous. The size, then we're dealing with ice and snow, and you know how that can be. I mean, it's difficult enough to keep them on your house, let alone.
Well, and these eaves aren't cheap either.
No.
I mean, you run into one, you get too much water, ice dam hits it, whatever it is. I mean, then once it breaks, then it's completely not working.
Yep.
It's incorporating how much more water that you didn't anticipate, and then you got to pay to fix it. I mean, you don't want to have to worry about that in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
You get one bad rainstorm with a bunch of ice on there or something like that. I mean, no one wants to deal with that kind of stuff.
Well, these French drains, they're pretty slick. So what we do is we dig a trench on where the drip line is on the backside or wherever these eaves. Usually it's on the backside. I mean, obviously we can't do this on the front side where we got cattle or we're driving and things. Usually on the backside somewhere, and we dig this trench, fill it in with washed rock, or we put a tile laid, a perforated tile down at the bottom, and then sometimes we put a fabric over it to keep silt and stuff from getting in it. Anyway, we have this washed rock, so when it rains, that water goes straight down to it, and boom. And even sometimes, one producer I'm working with now, we kind of anticipate down the road if they're going to put other buildings in, so we kind of put a drainage system in around the pits and around some of these heavy use areas that we're concreting, just so that we have those plumbed in, so that when we do build another building or they have an expansion or something, we have somewhere to take that clean water. Because it's just like a fire hydrant. I've seen some of these after a big rain. Of course, back to we don't get a 1/2 inch rain anymore. It's 3 inches in 20 minutes, and and that can move a lot of nutrients off these lots and farmyards and things like that. So those are really pretty cool, especially with not having to deal with the ice and all that kind of stuff. And they usually warm up. I've never seen one where it's not where it's like frozen. When it's frozen, the snow's not melting anyway. But they work pretty swell, and it's just back to that whole keeping clean water clean is really important too.
Yeah, so we've kind of talked about as far as holding on to manure, keeping the animals clean, keeping the animals dry. What are we going to do with all this manure? I mean, like we talked about, you want to have 6 months storage, and so that gives us basically 2 times a year that they want to be applicating or spreading it, whatever you want to use. And so the timing of being able to implement or apply these nutrients is really key. I mean, A, you never want to do it on frozen ground, but then B, you got to be able to hit it with the weather and the right conditions to be able to get out in the fields and then to put it on and actually get something out of it.
Yeah, and so then you go back to your nutrient management plan, pull that off the shelf, and you can start looking. So another thing, part of that nutrient management plan is teaching you when and where to send samples of your manure. So you can have your manure analyzed, whether it's the bed packing or the liquid, because that's going to vary. It's just like you go to the hardware store and buy some fertilizer for your garden or your lawn. It's got the different valuations. Well, you can have that manure tested to see how much phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen or things are in that manure to begin with. But yeah, that whole timing, because obviously in the summertime you're not going to be able to apply it to your corn and soybeans. Some people,
Why not?
It's going to be difficult. Then we're talking about all kinds of equipment and compaction, and so anyway, we were talking about this too. Is like there's always the challenge of getting into the methods. Is our no-till producers. Usually, what we're able to do is either inject it. So we've got these, like either behind an umbilical cord pulling with the tractor, you've got these injection knives, and it's almost like an anhydrous. It just pulls a slot in. I mean, I've gone out and I've looked, and it's like, whoa, it looks just like they put anhydrous on. It's just a little, very little disturbance. Then you have another set of application I call it a high disturbance, and they've got like disc blades behind. It gets a little bit more. We prefer to see the injection just because there's a little less disturbance. And then obviously, so on these no-till farms, if they can do the injection, that's great. Otherwise, they're applying that manure in the fall so that by spring it's kind of it's decomposed and kind of gotten into the soil. But our goal is, there's something called volatilization. So everybody's driven by the farm fields when they're spreading manure, and we all know the wonderful scents you come across. But part of that is volatilization of those nitrogen and things. So the more that happens, I mean, the less value of that nutrient we're gonna have to retain for the crop. So we have to try to incorporate it some way. So that's why you have the high disturbance displays behind some of those, and why you have the injection. And if you're just applying the solid manure to it, they usually run a disc over it just to try to incorporate that within 24 to 48 hours so that we're not losing those nutrients.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of guys, like the big question is, well, I got cover crops out there. Can I inject manure or can I put manure on it? Absolutely. That's some of the best times to be doing it, is either incorporating with your cover crop seed or putting it on either just before or just after. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to both of them, depending what kind of method you're using.
Well, it gets back to like my project with the bacteria reductions. So not only are we working with the livestock producers of manure for putting in pits and eaves and all that kind of stuff, but we found that putting cover crops on these fields that have had the manure applied is just as important to keeping that bacteria out of the streams too, because not only are you holding the ground in place, that cover crop is using that manure just like it would the residual nutrients that you use commercial fertilizer in your crops that weren't used. It's going to be holding on to that. So absolutely, I've got a couple producers, they inject their manure and then they go out and they drill in their cover crop, and it's just, I mean, you talk about green. I mean, it's just gorgeous. I mean, you see, but what it is green cash. It's your money. It's your valuable nutrient. Which brings us to mind one of our dairy farmers that he has not purchased commercial fertilizer in over 20 years because of all the storage of containing all the manure, and nothing's running off. He's able, and he analyzes it. He's able to spread that on his cropland and use it as a nutrient. It's a renewable, it's local. Commercial fertilizer, if you really study up on this stuff, a lot of it is mined in Africa and Canada, and it's got to come over on ships and by rail and a truck and then applied. As far as like energy savings, and one day we're going to have a whole podcast on energy savings and conservation. But as far as energy use on a farm, commercial fertilizer is the biggest use of energy, and it's because it has to be hauled so far. So here we've got the nutrients used at the farm. We're putting it in storage so we have a better containment of it so that it can be properly applied, and the value of that nutrient can be used on the farm. So cover crops is just something additional that we can use to help control that.
Yeah, and that's got to be one of my favorite stories through working here is this particular landowner, like he said, he's never bought commercial fertilizer. They've used their own manure over the whole span of their lifespan and never had to go out and buy it. But we had a field day one time, and another adjacent landowner who was maybe had the wrong idea of what was going on there and didn't like the smell of manure, didn't really know the benefits and whatnot. And this dairy farmer says, "Yeah, I've never bought commercial fertilizer ever, and I've only used my manure for my nutrient import and stuff like that." And she just eyes got big. And I don't know how long after this conversation was, but now they are renting her ground and implementing their manure on her farm. And so that was pretty cool. I mean, to see someone who maybe had the wrong idea of what was going on or what the inputs are and stuff like that, and to now be using them is pretty impressive, I think. And so really, it's environmentally safe. I mean, especially when you're putting it on in the right spot, and that's why we try to do all the things that we've already talked about, is apply at the right time, be able to have that storage, keeping the clean water clean. I mean, all those things really put together the whole package.
Well, and last year we had this huge spike in the price of fertilizer. And here, boy, those farmers that had livestock, they were able to use that. They didn't have to purchase that expensive fertilizer. And they had neighbors saying, hey, I'd much rather have spread manure on my land. So, yeah, it does change the attitude of, and that's getting back to where we're talking about ag waste. It's not waste, it's a valuable nutrient. And with what we're doing here, working with our landowners and our cattle producers, is finding a way that they can utilize that nutrient to maximize it so that they're getting the full value of it. They're putting it on their land, like we said, in an environmental friendly way. And it's adding money. It's a return on investment. We've talked about enhancing soil and water quality improvements and stuff. But the bottom dollar is you got to help keep the farmer on the land and keep livestock production in Iowa, but we want to do it in the right way. And you're not going to do it if you can't make money. So this is another really nice side effect of having that manure utilized on your farm, is the value of it.
Yeah, and I think before we move on to the last topic here is we need to put out that open invite to Mark and Charlie to get on this podcast, because if you guys want to be entertained, you want to get some laughs, these two folks would probably, you might want to wear a diaper because they might make you pee yourself. I mean, these two, whenever we have a field day, we always go out there. I mean, every single time, and we can just pull up, we can get out of the vehicles, and they come walking, and then here comes the little puppy dog, and it's their show from then on. And
they do
most of the times
job.
you got to pull them away to get out of there, because they could sit there all day long and talk and cracking jokes and whatever. But they are so entertaining, but educational at the same time.
And we've had opportunities where we've had the Iowa governor has been out there to see what they're doing. We've had Secretary of Agriculture out to their farm to do things. One of the coolest things was a few years ago we had, so like I said, a lot of my money comes from the EPA through the Section 319. So we had one of our regional EPA individuals, and so my watershed basin guy said, hey, you got a place where we could bring her out to take a look at this stuff. She's coming up from Kansas City and wanted to visit with some of the producers we're working with. And so we got out there, and she hopped in the front with Mark, and Hunter and I jumped in the back of the side-by-side, and we were riding around the back. I bet we were out there for over an hour. And it was a crummy day. It was raining. It had rained, and there was mud. So we had what we had done, and then we also had what we wanted to do in the future. And she could see, here we've got these open lots, and we got our trout stream that's not too far away. But they just did a fantastic job. And that's part of what we're doing. We don't want to keep it a secret. And that's the reason we're doing these podcasts. We want as many people to know what's available. And like I said, there's no reason, like I said, I've said this before, our communities, or the general populace, has this deemed that water quality is important. We're going to have cattle and food and things like that. So why not maximize what we can do, help these individuals with their resource concerns, and end up with these really nice things. But yeah, these farmers that we're working with, I dairy farmed my whole life until 4 years ago we sold our dairy herd. And so I don't miss being tied down milking cows, but I miss my cows. And so I always say I got to go out to visit one of these farms to get my cow fix. So, yeah, it's fun. It's and that's the other thing. We take our state legislators with us out onto some of these tours. We haven't taken any federal legislators, national ones out there. Good idea. We should probably do that.
Ashley
But-
Hinson, let's get her up
Well,
there.
we could do that too. But we usually take our state legislators out there because a lot of what our funding is coming from the state. And it is so important for them to see how we're using that money. I've always told our state legislators, I said, you give me $1 and I'll turn it into 10 because I'll leverage it with federal programs and things like that and landowners funds, and we can get a lot accomplished. So they're very appreciative of it. So yeah, all of our public officials, we do our best to keep them informed of what we're doing, what the landowners are doing to improve the water.
Yeah, and just to show how much appreciation these landowners have or operators have is, I can remember the one field day we had out there, and our state representative Jane Bloomingdale was out there, and they had just had a brand new calf, and so they gave her the opportunity to name the calf. And what do you think she named it? Jane. Whether Jane's
Yeah,
still
that
out
was
there or
pretty
not, you
cute.
never know. Maybe they're milking her right now, but
Well, yeah, there's always something happening on a farm. Like we go out there and one day they're chopping silage, one day they're delivering sand, one day they're, there's always activity out there. So, that's kind of fun to see too. But it's not only confinement animals and buildings and manure pits that we work with. We still have a lot of people that like to graze cattle, especially beef cows. Once in a while, we have a dairy farmer that will do some grazing. So we also have an EQIP program for that, and it's generally called rotational grazing or pasture management or watering systems. So let's say we've got someone who's got 100 head of cattle. They've got 100 acres of ground that they want to pasture. The best utilization and the best thing for soil health. Once again, I'm going to mention Ray Archuleta. He loves having cattle on the landscape. It kind of mimics what settlement was when we had bison and elk and deer crossing the landscape, but having these cattle actually on the land. But it's stocking rates, it's the area, it's how long the cattle are exposed to the grasses and grazing. So what we'll do is we have a plan for that too. It's called a grazing plan. We have a specialist that works with the farmer, and what we'll do is we'll develop these paddocks where you're rotationally moving the cattle around the farm. So they're on this field for 4 or 5 days, then they move on to the next one, to the next one, next one. And you divide it up to how many cattle you have, how many days you want in the rotation. It can be a longer rotation, 30-day rotation, where you actually can take a crop of hay off of some of these, so that you're always got that fresh, lush grass growing. And it's also better for the pasture, because I think we've talked about that too, is the height of the grass is a reflection of the depth of the root system. So if you've got overgrazed pastures and it looks like a golf course, it's like, an inch or two of grass, well, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 inches of roots. If you have that, maintain that 6 to 8 to 10 inches of grass, you're going to have a much better root system. It's going to hold the soil better. You're going to have better soil health and all kinds of that.
well, not always just the length matters. I mean, the healthiness and the what's the word I'm looking for? The maximums or the nutrients. It's gonna be a lot more hardy. Is the word I'm looking for. So it's not always the length of the roots you're gonna have, but it's gonna be a lot more hardy. It's gonna be able to withstand those more severe droughts, extra rainfall, whatever it may be. And so not just having the length of it, but also having that hardiness to it.
Well,
is
yeah,
really
it's
important.
because the better root system you have, it's you're going to have more tonnage per acre so your production for your pasture is going to just increase. Well, then the other thing with that is the watering system. We talked a little bit about keeping cattle out of the stream because of the bacteria. But the other thing is, so you got all these paddocks, you're going to have a way to water these cattle. So we can either do it with a well system where you're pumping water. But one of the coolest things I was exposed to many years ago is, so we fenced the cattle out of a trout stream, and he had a beef cow calf operation. It was like, well, how am I going to water my cattle now? They had these nose pumps, and literally, I mean, I swear these cows are like trained puppies. They go out there, and with their nose, they were able to push this mechanism on this water. It pumped the water, had a hose down to the creek, pumped it up to the water mechanism. It's crazy. It's like a nose pump. Who'd ever thought of that? But cows are smart.
wonder if they have to implement watering system for when they do grazing systems for camels.
Well, you wouldn't have to have as much water. You'd only have to water them like once a month. I don't know much about camels.
We're gonna start a
we're
camel
we're,
farm.
we're
and test
kind
them
of
out.
that's a little beyond our expertise, but yeah. So the watering system. So that's kind of a cool thing, and we can actually, if you're setting up a system like that, we can actually even pay for drilling a well if it's set up for a watering system. But like I said, there's like, you know, part of it is to keep the cattle out of the stream. It's not to keep them out continually. We can do what we call a flash grazing also, and that kind of keeps that riparian zone in condition, kind of keeps out some of the nastier woody vegetation. Cows go through there. They're just not there for a long extended time where they've ate that grass down all the way down. So with our EQIP program, I mean, man, we can cover quite a expanse of different practices. You know, it's all kind of tied into that livestock and the resource, and you know that ag waste, nutrient management, and even with rotational grazing, the cows obviously they're spreading the manure themselves, but it's spread out so that after a certain amount of time, that manure is deteriorated, absorbed back in the soil. It's actually helping feed the soil or the grasses and things. Part of that too is rehabilitation of these pastures. I know I've got a practice where it's pasture management, and you know, sometimes some of these older pastures, especially some of these creek pastures stuff, they've just gotten down to where they're just bluegrass or maybe some brome or something. But we can also increase the amount of different diversity of that. And we add legumes into it. Legumes are a nitrogen fixing plant. So they're actually taking nitrogen from the atmosphere, putting it in the ground for the grasses to use. So the grasses use the nitrogen, the legumes are transporting the nitrogen to those grass legumes. So it kind of puts things back into harmony, kind of replicates what nature's doing. So not only are we working with some pretty large producers, we're working with some smaller producers, but we're also working with those who prefer to keep grazing. But we've got ways that we can help with that too, to maximize your pasture, your land, and rate of gain, and getting those producers milk production up too.
Yeah. So like you said, we'll work with the small, we'll work with the medium, we'll work with the large, we'll work with any kind of animal you got. I mean, you just got to come in, you got to tell us what you got, and then we'll work from there. I mean, majority of the time, there's always something we can do. We just got to work hard enough to find the right option and the right path to go down. Whether that is the cattle, whether that's the cover crop, whether that's the stream bank, whatever it may be, there's always something out there. We just got to figure out, and that's what our job really is project coordinators, is to coordinate and find the right path. Excuse me, the right path to go down and put you in the path to success.
It's kind of exciting right now. When we did our INE to visit some of these producers with cattle, we actually had 7 new producers that we're working with. So we've got all different stages that. But you know, getting back to that whole EQIP program and talking about how long it takes, and kind of why we put some people on that fast track to, you know, just go out and have your nutrient management plan done, is we've had people that are very patient with us. And we had one producer that we got funded in the last year that they waited 5 years for some of this funding. So like I said, it's very competitive. Rumor has it that there's some really good funds coming down the pike for EQIP programs, and I can't imagine it wouldn't be for our livestock producers also, and some of this manure handling systems that we're working on. So it's exciting times. We're getting a lot of stuff done, and there's nothing better than going out after one of these systems is done, and every one of them says, I wish I had done it 20 years ago. Like Hunter was saying, hauling manure every day. I remember going to one farm, visiting with the landowners, and the dad was out there and the son was milking the cows, and he's like, yeah, he says, I can't wait for this manure pit. I haul manure every day. Well, when we haul manure every day, we're probably putting it on in areas at times of the year when we shouldn't. But man, he put that manure pit in, and he said, man, I don't know what I'm going to do with my days now. I'm not hauling manure every day. So, and that's good. And then the other thing I remember one time I was on a big manure, or big feed lot, and it was earth ground, just a dirt lot. And the farmer called me up and said, "Man, I need some help with my problems. I got a lot of runoff and stuff." I said, "Oh, great, I'll be out." He says, "No, you can't come out. I don't want you to come out for 2 or 3 weeks. It looks too bad." I said, "No, I want to see it at the worst, so that when we implement this, I can come back and see how much is improved." And I was talking to some of their hired men afterwards, and it increased the efficiency of their system. They were able to handle their cattle. Rate of gains improved, but wear and tear on the machinery. We had these nice inline feed bunks. We weren't driving out and opening gates and trying to get in and around the cattle and in the mud and all that kind of stuff. So it's really improved the water quality leaving their farms. It's improved their daily lives, and most likely those individuals are going to continue raising livestock in Iowa, and that's good for our economy. It's good for diversity. When commodity prices are down, usually cattle prices are up, or hopefully they're not down at both at the same time. But yeah, it's good to, the old saying, don't have all your eggs in one basket, kind of change it up a little bit. So that's part of what we do. And like I said, we've got so many different topics we want to talk to you about. And we were like, last night we were like thinking, what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, geez, we got the EQIP, we talked about cover crops and stream bank. It's like, well, ag waste is huge. So it's kind of a big ticket item that we work on. We don't work on a lot. I would say maybe 2 or 3 a year are constructed. But like I said, we've got quite a few in the pipeline right now, and hopefully you'll see some of that stuff going up, and we'll be working with these producers in the near future.
Yeah, so like you said, we got a lot of things we want to talk about, but let us know what you want to hear. A lot of it we try to work on time-sensitive material as what's kind of important right now, what we're working on. And actually, we're going to be heading out here pretty soon to go get more of those EQIP applications signed before the deadline on Friday. So if there's something that you want to hear or some more information you want to talk about or whatever, or if you want to get on camera here and talk about some different things, let us know. We're open to a lot of different ideas. We plan to get some farmers on here. Obviously, right now it's not a great time unless we want to be sitting in the combine and hear all the background noise. But we're going to work with that, and hopefully this winter, once things slow down a little bit, we can get some of those guys in here that we've mentioned and stuff. So we're going to sign off here. Episode number 3 of Beyond the Dirt podcast.